Hi, we are, I believe, yes, we are streaming on the tube.
On the tube. Okay. We're at 2 after. Um, I'm going to go ahead and I guess start. Is that cool with everyone?
Yeah, you didn't
All right.
record
Should
the
we hit the
record.
record button?
Yeah. Here, I'll click it.
I can do it.
Okay, do it.
Okay. Does anybody object to me recording this session? All right. All right. My name is Dennis, and today I'm going to talk about zero downtime migrations and how we can get there with Pulp 3. I'm going to start sharing my screen. If I get it working. I have to do everything twice for some reason, but all right, it says that I'm sharing, I think. Can you see my screen?
Yes. You want to make it a little bigger?
Yeah. All right. So we've discussed zero downtime migrations at open floor before, but I will go over some of the motivations here today. For most people, downtime is not desirable. Operators of Pulp don't want to take Pulp down in order to do upgrades because they have um, services, clients all over the world, in different time zones that rely on those services. And so it's hard to pick downtimes that will work for everyone. Clustered installations make the downtime even more complicated because you have to take all pieces of your cluster down, perform upgrades on all of them, and then bring them up. And uh, this requires pretty much coordination by a human doing this. It's really complicated to add support for that in our installer. And as we work towards deploying Pulp on Kubernetes and have those deployments managed by the Pulp operator, this pretty much becomes a requirement because in those environments, there's pretty much an implied guarantee that the services remain running because whenever you take a container down, it's supposed to respawn. And so there's a need to be able to run two versions of a container, the latest one and the previous version of it also. And so right now, that's not possible with the way migrations work in Pulp. The upgrade process right now requires that users stop all the services, upgrade the code by either upgrading from PyPI or if they're using their RPMs, they upgrade the RPMs, then run the migrations and start all the services. And when you're doing this all on one box, you can do this fairly simply. Even using our installer, you can do this. When it comes to multiple boxes, it gets more complicated. So are there any questions about the motivation and just the problems that we have with our upgrade process right now?
Yeah, so I thought that the installer doesn't stop the services. It just upgrades code, runs migration, and restarts services. or it
And-
upgrades codes, restores services, runs migrations.
And that may be what it does, but the issue I think is that if that is what it does, then the problem is
that's not right.
the issue is
Yeah.
that when migrations apply SQL schema alter statements, then the application code that is still connected to that database will begin to error.
Well,
Yeah.
it was my question that I think Django admin doesn't allow you, if there are any connections to the database, to run migrations.
I think it does. I think it doesn't, and I'm not sure. We need to check, but I experience this error a lot in my dev environment. But I think it's because I'm running pclean, and
Yeah, it doesn't let you drop the database.
it doesn't let you drop the database.
Maybe it's also my experience.
Yeah. And you might be right, Tanya, but from what I've read, I think people are doing this.
Well, I mean, it's an important
with Django applications.
Yeah, it's an important part because there should be some migrations at some point being ran, right? And with the zero downtime. Okay.
Yep.
And I want to add to what Brian said. You said the application code might start to error, and I think that's the good case. It might even run without errors, but doing the wrong thing.
Right.
Yep. That is a very good point, Matthias.
And
so,
I want to call out an important difference between Pulp 2 and Pulp 3. That is a big motivator for this kind of work. In Pulp 2, because all of the binary file serving happened via files that were on a file system, what people would do during their upgrades for Pulp 2 is they would stop their workers and their resource manager and Postgres and the REST API. Thank you. But they would leave their Apache system serving their content. And so if we look at the impact for what an upgrade experience was like in Pulp 2, the massive number of clients that were fetching data during the upgrade while it was occurring could still fetch data. And this is a very desirable property. And now, because Pulp 3 no longer uses that file system layout, you can't do that anymore, which means that unlike our previous major version software, you cannot have your clients will experience an outage in a way that they did not with Pulp 2 because of the architectural change, because our binary data is now served in a way that involves the database, in a way that involves the Gunicorn Pulp Core content app. And this is an important change that motivates this need in Pulp 3 in a way that we actually didn't have the same motivations in Pulp 2.
Right. I'm wondering if like any sort of caching solution users may have would be able to, or if there's an exporter, if that would, if that would solve it, address the needs of large scale sites.
That's a way.
Yeah. And I believe we discussed something earlier in the week about providing exporters that provide behavior that is similar to Pulp 2 symlinks. But I believe there's still motivation to make upgrades easier for the most common use case, where you're using the Pulp Core content app with the database to serve your content.
Agreed.
One of the things that we established.
If I'm only adding, I don't think. Yeah. If you go back to the top of the page, you'll see that you state that it's complicated for the to stop all parts of the cluster before any of them is upgraded. I don't think that's going to be too hard for us to support. I think that would be feasible. It would be not too hard.
I agree. The crux of the issue isn't that it's. I agree with you, Mike. It's not that it's complicated. It's that it creates an outage.
Right. Exactly.
Cool. we can update that language. I would like to go down to what does the zero downtime upgrade process look like. We've already established that in order to support zero downtime upgrades, we would require users to go from one Y release to another in order to allow plugin writers and Pulp core to have migrations that when run in a specific order can be relied on to not be disruptive to the system. And so all of this discussion is the assumption that the upgrade is happening from either for a bug stream, a patch release, so a Z stream, or to the next Y release. And in those instances, users should be able to upgrade the code of the application, run the migrations while the application is still running, and then restart services as needed on different parts of their cluster, which means that they can upgrade the code at different times on the different parts of the cluster. Thank you for updating the language there on bullet 3. Does everybody agree that this is what a zero downtime upgrade process is?
I would maybe add that there can be some rollback if something goes wrong.
That's really hard. And I'm not the
I know.
but that is one of the things, whether we plan for the first instantiation of this or not, I guarantee you users of Pulp who are managing large installations are going to ask the question, yeah, what if I've decided that it was a terrible idea and I need to back off? And I don't know that I have an answer for that, but I know it's going to be a requirement.
So
note that we have many products that do not have an answer to that.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
so Django, I mean, Django in theory provides mechanisms for us to write migrations that both support upgrades and downgrades,
Mhm.
which means that a migration provides SQL or Django operations that will remove whatever was done in the upgrade. However, there are still instances where it's just not possible.
Yeah.
Yep.
If that is
Without a backup.
if that is a requirement, I think backups and restores are the way.
I just wanted to say, in the old way, it's easy. You stop all the service, you make a backup, you upgrade the stuff, and then you can roll back at any later time.
I think in the new way it's the same. You make a backup. It's everything you just said. Same.
Okay, but that involves a downtime.
No, it doesn't.
No.
You can do one backups in Postgres.
Okay.
Yeah, you would configure.
More backups.
Yeah, I mean, you would configure. There's some really excellent snapshotting workflows with the write-ahead log in Postgres, and sometimes people like to coordinate that moment in time snapshot with a file system snapshot, and that's part of the trick with Pulp is that you have to do both the DB and the file system at the same moment, and so you end up relying on I'm forgetting the file system technology here, but it's
Journaling? Are you thinking about a journaling file system, Brian, or are you thinking of something else?
No, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about LVM, an LVM snapshot, for example.
Right.
A lot of people do backups with LVM snapshots, and that allows you to take right at that moment, so that way you don't have to like walk the file system over time.
Yep.
And what you do is you coordinate with the LVM snapshot with your Postgres write-ahead log snapshot. And oh look, if we keep the write-ahead log on the LVM system, it's actually one moment in time.
Yep. And the thing is, with all of this that we're talking about, Pulp is absolutely not inventing this process. There's been a ton of research. So Postgres has support, and the file system has support, and clusters have the support. So we're going to be riding on the shoulders of people that have done a lot of hard work, which doesn't mean there aren't going to be holes and it isn't difficult. And sometimes you're looking at it going, I don't know how we're going to do that with this particular migration. But we're not inventing this out of whole cloth, which makes me feel a little better.
Matthias, I agree with your point. My calling out of like all these things is basically just, I agree with it, and I think there are ways. There's
answers. It's a really good observation. There are just answers to a lot of these questions. We just have to make sure that we ask the question and have it written down in our how-to doc to take advantage of the stuff that's out there as well.
And I think here it means our migrations must not be rollbackable.
Yes, I don't think that we want to start. I don't think we want to make that a requirement. One, for two reasons. One, it's really hard, and two, there are situations where it cannot be done. For example, situations where data has been combined in a way that you could not uncombine them later because you've lost the original records.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Well, those situations cannot appear because you cannot combine them until you have the old parts of the program not running on the database anymore.
Cool. Let's discuss that in 1 minute.
Yeah.
Sure.
So today I want us to try to put some thoughts together on how we can get there. And there are basically two things that we need for us to be able to move forward with this goal. We need to come up with documentation that outlines the requirements for plugin writers, that outline how they can introduce changes and what kind of changes are appropriate when, so that the incremental kind of upgrade. And then after we tell plugin writers what they can do, we need to also provide them with a CI. The plugin template needs to have checks in it that will check the migrations that come with code to make sure that they're compatible with the policy that we outlined in the documentation. And so this is what I want us to discuss. And this is kind of what Matthias was going into a second ago. What does it mean? What are the requirements for migrations? And one of the things I believe we discussed before is that destructive changes need to come a release after the additive changes, or I don't even know what the best way of putting this.
Can I describe this?
Yes, please.
So my understanding of the approach here is that anytime if you're making additive changes, then that's not a problem. You can put those migrations in. They don't running old application code with a database that has had additive changes will not cause a problem. They will not be used until the application code restarts, but there will be no errors. The issue comes in when, say, you do like a rename of a attribute name, which in the database will cause you to have to run a schema alter statement, and this would be a destructive change because your old application code's using the old name. You apply the migration, your database has renamed the table, actually it's schema layout, and now you have a problem. So the trick is to split your destructive changes into two parts. And a rename is a good example, and all the different structure changes can follow a similar pattern. So the splitting in two parts would be instead of doing a schema alter to perform the rename, you would have two migrations. One migration would be I'm going to create the new table name, so not a rename but a table name creation. And the second part of the migration would be I'm going to delete the old table name, not the old table column name. These are columns. And so by taking something that was a single rename SQL event and splitting it into two parts, an add and then a remove, what you can do is you can deliver the additive changes as part of the migrations with the Y release, and you can deliver the delete column migration, the second half of the migration, in the Y+1 release. Because by the time Y+1 is here and its application code is already using the new table name and all your servers are using the new table column name, you can apply that migration freely because the old column is in total non-use. And so this is the splitting approach pattern.
So Brian, I think I've got that. I want to walk through it and you guys can tell me when I go wrong. So my cluster, let's say, is at 3.y minus 1 right now. And there's, table A has column A1 that I want eventually to have be named column A2, right? Does that make sense so far? So all of my y minus 1 code is talking about column A1. We're going to upgrade the cluster to 3.y. And then we're going to run the migration.
Other order. You run the migrations before you perform the rolling restart.
Yes, before we perform the rolling restart. But I'm following the list that's right here under what does zero downtime upgrade process look like. All my nodes are going to upgrade the code, not restart. It's just the code.
Okay,
the
yeah.
Modules are now upgraded.
Thank you.
And they're all resting on disk at 3.y, but they're not actually running yet. On disk knows about A2, but the running code knows A1. We run the migration, so now we have A1 and A2. And the old code still works because the data is still there. And now we start restarting the services on the cluster. And as a node comes up, it starts using A2, but for some period of time, and that might be measured, by the way, in weeks, because we know that this is how users do things, is they upgrade and they wait for a thing to get stable on the Y release while still leaving Y minus 1 back there. The old code is still looking at the A1 column. The new code that is now existing is looking at A2. Eventually, all of my cluster is at 3.y, and it's all looking at the A.2 column. And so at Y+1, I upgrade my code and it can do whatever the hell it wants. But there's a migration in there that deletes A1 because no code can be running and looking at the database that knows about the A1 column at the point that the Y+1 release goes out. And I feel like I could have said that more succinctly, but that's the approach that's how this works, right?
That's the idea.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
but as you pointed it out, I think there's a reasonable amount of time where you need to sync A1 and A2. And neither the old nor the new code can do that. So there must be some third party. Maybe it's a database feature that you say, this column is always that column.
Yeah, I agree.
I see what you mean. Yeah, there's a variety of ways you could do that down at the database level. Like my off the top of the head way is when I introduce A2, at the same time, I'm going to introduce a trigger on A1 that whenever you update or insert or delete from A1, it does the equivalent operation on A2, for example. I don't know if that's the best way. There are definitely other ways to do that, but that's a good point that that's part of the how to do this how to do this little waltz would have to be considered.
Agreed completely.
Yeah, I'm trying to capture this in the bullet points under the plugin writer documentation.
Yeah, we can capture as much as you can, Dennis, but I'm sure we'll need to, massage the information, and I'm perfect. I will volunteer for trying to write this up if necessary, as we get to that point.
Yeah. So what other considerations need to be made?
So the migration, the class of migration that concerns me, and I know there's got to be an answer out there because other people have done this, is the kind of migration that we did, for example, when we were trying to get the import-export stuff for Pulp RPM, and we had to change the ordinality of some data entities. They had allowed duplicates, and they couldn't allow duplicates. That was a schema change, a very complicated data migration change, and it also changed the code where the code had been willing to deal with, I might get multiple answers back, and it had to change to, I'm only going to get one answer back. And I don't know exactly how we're going to do those kinds of changes, but I'm sure that there's been research out there on them because that's not an atypical kind of problem.
I think this is a bit of a hand-wavy answer. That's a legitimate problem, though, for sure. And I believe in those situations, you may need to not ship your migration right away. In fact, you might need to ship application code that gets rolled out prior to any database changes occurring, which would kind of split it over 3 releases. Perhaps that happens in a ZStream release, where the ZStream provides the final ZStream prior to the new Y.0, which ships the migration. The Y.0 would allow you to deliver new application code, and perhaps you need to have that new application code prior to anything changing in the DB. So basically, you spread it out over more time.
And I think that there's an onus on either Pulp Core or the plugin writer, wherever the change, that class of change has to be made, that to maintain zero downtime for a while, your code needs to know that sometimes if you ask the question, sometimes you're going to get one answer, sometimes you're going to get 2. It puts a bigger onus on the code writer, which I'm okay with because this isn't a common thing. It's going to happen, but this is not the 90% case. It's probably not even the 20% case. But it is something we need to think about how to give instruction to people on how to address it in a way that lets the system continue executing while we're walking through all these complicated steps.
Yep, and if you
anyway, the net of all that.
If you look into folks like there's some interesting talks from the build and deployment folks at, for instance, like Facebook, for example, and it's basically the stuff you're talking about. They have to at Facebook, because they're changing the things so often that their application code oftentimes in some places needs to expect the data layer to be 2 different ways, and then over time they end up removing that after the migrations have all been applied and quiesced.
Exactly right. Exactly. Like I don't have any of these resources to hand, but I have skimmed a bunch of things over the years, partially to get my own head out of the idea that no, you just have to turn things off and on again to make everything work. As we come up with things like this, do we have a spot where we can drop the papers that we're finding that talk about how to do this complicated stuff?
We actually have a ticket that's already opened.
Yeah, it's
cool.
7120.
Yes, thank you, Brian. And can we?
I'll put it down here in the
resources.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you can't tell, my big push here is not to naysay this even a little bit, but simply to make sure that we don't reinvent wheels, because some of these wheels are really difficult and some really bright people have done brilliant work on it. I'd rather take advantage of them else's mistakes on our own.
That's my favorite part of open source. Is that you get to stand on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Is there a plan in action how we identify changes that are critical with respect to migrations?
My understanding is that we just ask Django, like, are there migrations? Or did I not understand the question correctly?
My take on it, not that it's to me, is that we need to have the CI regex inspect the migrations that are produced at pre-merge time, and there are specific statements that we can look for. There's a very limited number of statements that will cause application failures, and one of the resources down at line 39 outlines that person's analysis of regexes, which we could use in our CI to identify, oh, look, on this PR, this is a downtime migration. We cannot merge this PR. And then what happens is when people split it into the two parts, like we were talking about earlier, these regexes won't find those destructive statements because they won't be there anymore.
Can we start running those like right now, not as fatal errors, but just as like infos out of CI? Just even with no other work done, just as part of CI, as part of Travis, say, hey, I'm looking at your migrations. Solution, this kind of thing is going to be a problem, just so we can get used to looking for those kind of things.
I mean, we definitely can, and I'm not on the CI team, but one of the challenges is that if the CI passes green, people tend not to look at the log.
That's right.
That's fair.
But I think
no way to turn it yellow for this reason.
We could. I mean, I'm just interested in gathering data as we move forward.
That's the problem.
Yeah, but if there's some way, like perhaps we have it post a comment back on the PR. Perhaps this is a GitHub action that just runs regexes outside of Travis. I mean, like, I should not be naysaying it because that's not how I feel about it. I think that would be a great idea.
Yeah, and we cannot move forward without CI for this. And so CI definitely goes hand in hand.
Sure. I was just thinking we could start doing these inspections without any actual impact on our process or hitting any of our deadlines, so we can start seeing training ourselves to look and go, oh yeah, that was kind of a dangerous thing to do, just so we get our heads in that mindset, as it were, before we actually start taking the concrete steps for changing our development process.
Well, so that leads me to another question. Do we want to set a goal for when we want to start supporting such upgrades?
My take on it is, and I'm super into it, is that we should try a fake it till we make it strategy. And what that is that we wouldn't change the installer at all, although we might correct that thing that we talked about earlier. But we wouldn't actually make this claim for users. We wouldn't actually have the installer perform roll and restart, all the stuff that it would need to do to actually make it real so that users can benefit. But what we would try to do is write our application code and our migrations as if we were, and see how it goes. If it's an absolutely intolerable process, then maybe we don't do it. If it turns out that it's cheap and easy, and we get through 2 Y releases without any problems, then we flip the switch official.
Cool. That sounds like what Grant was saying would be really good to do, and add the CI checks soon, so that we can actually start seeing some information about this.
So I have a question, and let me know if it's too much deep into the detail. So you said that when we split migrations into 2 parts, the second will be delivered with the Z release?
No. I think it's with the following Y release.
Yeah, because
Sorry, with the following, yes, so we can upgrade properly. Okay, so with the next Y release, how do you think we can track that? Like, the work is done, I'm working on this right now, I wrote migration right now, and then there is this hanging part which we should not forget for the next release.
that's a good question. We'll definitely need a way not to forget about it. Although if we do forget about it, it's not really the worst thing in the world. If we noticed it, oh, later we forgot to delete this table, it's not in use. But what we could do is create the future milestone, create the issue to perform the column removal, and put it on the milestone. That way, when that release comes around and there's the blocker review meeting, we'll see that that's a piece of work, or some other way to track it.
And could we run this second migration right after all the services started working? Like right after the upgrade is done and everything is up?
It's possible. It's definitely possible. What that would look like is the application code would contain both halves of the migration, and what we would need to do, though, is we would need to have the migrate command that the installer runs pass the additional parameter to specify the specific migrate to version. So you'd say, application layer or Django, just migrate us to migration 54. And there would be another phase where the installer would know, oh, actually now it's safe for us to go to, after the rolling restart, after the application servers are all online, oh, now we go to 59. Or now we go the rest of the way. It doesn't even need to know the second point. You go all the way, basically. And we could ship them together. I mean, that's a thing. It's just that it would require installer coordination. And if a user does it wrong, it's not the worst thing in the world either. Their application servers error a little bit. Well, they did it wrong. I mean, what can I say?
I've taken too many Sev ones from customers that did it wrong.
So that's the safety, that's the risk, that's the reward.
So the thing that's in my head for this, as we think about what we want to do, is the world that everybody is moving into is not, I'm an administrator, and even if my Pulp cluster isn't my 6 machines that I SSH into all the time. It's a giant mass of pods in OpenShift somewhere that are coming and going, and that I can spin up and spin down. And whatever we do in our heads, we have to look at that as it has to work in that environment, where what the admin does, and this is the reality, because like I say, I have taken customer issues from this particular reality, is the admin literally doesn't know how to do much of anything other than say upgrade to a bunch of new pods and then shut down the old ones and bring up the new ones, or actually more likely bring up the new ones, and when they're all up and running and happy, now I'm going to shut down the old ones. They're not on the command line on those machines. They're not running individual commands they're not even machines. They're whatever they happen to be out in the cloud world. And again, I know this is a solved problem, and the stuff we're talking about here are all pieces, parts for how it is solved. But in our heads, we need to realize that the computing world is heading away from the individual admin who's SSH'd into his systems to an admin who just has a dashboard of pods all over the place.
One thing on the other end of that path, we are always talking about creating migrations here, but we don't write them. We create them by changing the models. So maybe this is more of it needs to be that way. So that means splitting the migration is you change the model in a way that is additive only, and you create the migration, and then you do the other half, and then you create the next migration. And that's
because the other option is manually writing migrations, which we will probably have to do at some point for some crazy issue, but we definitely want to avoid it. I agree with you that it's.
Yep. Having just done a really, really complicated one recently, yes, we definitely want to avoid it. Although I will say that the Django tooling for doing that is so much better than writing, raw SQL and the previous ways I've done it. So it's not nearly as painful as it could be. There's a lot of support there for it, but we definitely want to avoid it. But yeah, in the example we used before, Matthias, you'd have model that knows about A1 field A1, and then for a while you'd have model that knows about A1 and A2, and then the next release its model only knows about A2.
And whether the code uses one or the other is a different story.
Yeah,
That's right.
the code will have to, if I'm responsible for that model, there might be, depending on the kind of migration, there might be a time where my code has to say, if A1 in model, then I'm going to do one thing and otherwise. So that's where I was talking about there will be migrations where, as code authors, you are responsible for knowing you might be straddling multiple worlds. I mean, Tanya, you're not wrong.
I know.
Yeah,
And I
Matthias,
believe there is a way to add SQL to Django migrations.
there is.
There is.
Yep.
I will,
Lucky for
however,
Grant.
I'm very proud of myself. I didn't use that with that complicated migration because holy shit, was it easier to do in Python than in SQL.
Yeah, Matthias, I think you're describing the mechanics of how to do that very well. I think using, not writing these migrations by hand is important, because one of my goals is to not slow down or make the development process more complicated. That's actually my biggest concern with this type of a change. So what you're saying sounds great. And also and I said this before too, but if we need to ship application code that runs prior to the first migration running, then we should do it in the previous Z stream. And that's, I think, a very fine thing. You just need to make sure that you upgrade to the latest Z stream last release before you go to the next Y release. And perhaps there's a particular mode, and maybe it's the default for the installer, that says, I really need zero downtime migrations, and it performs a check to make sure that your stuff is on the latest Z stream. And that way, This process goes easy peasy, and perhaps it just carries you through that upgrade all automatically.
Yeah, that's what good.
It definitely needs to be aware of the whole cluster, though, because it needs to take the whole cluster through that.
It will. Spritzy's gonna take us there. Spritzy, I hope you're watching this.
That's classic.
Question.
You give the hard parts to whoever's not in the meeting.
I think we are about to set in place another policy that allows kind of zero downtime plugin updates, where we already spread you can use that plugin with 2 versions of Pulp Core.
Yep.
Is that interfering with the zero downtime here? Does that mean updating might be spread over more releases even?
I don't perceive them as being related. The plugin call interface having a longer deprecation cycle should allow just that, which is that you can, like, Pulp Core itself will need to have tables that involve plugin code adhere to this policy as well. And so I believe that by doing it in Pulp Core and following the deprecation cycle, the plugins will receive its benefit without additional effort.
I'm thinking, so Matthias, that's a really good question. I think I agree with Brian that that they're orthogonal. I suspect, in the back of my head, I'm like, I think I can almost imagine a place where we'll need to have a 3Y thing, but maybe we won't. I suspect this will be something we learn as we start thinking this way, and as we start, as Brian pointed out, as we start developing this way, even if we're not claiming we support it, we will learn stuff. And I think that will be making tweaks to our process as we go forward. Okay, now you're just too cool, and I want to sing the shiny song from Moana. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Awesome. Go ahead, Tanya.
I just wanted to, I mean, I understand the potential need for the upgrading to the latest Z-Stream for every upgrade, but I think it might be perceived as very undesirable for users.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And while that's structurally an option to deliver application code ahead of the migration, I would like to, as we explore going down this road, in this fake it till we make it strategy, not adopt that. Let's not make that a requirement right from the start, because that's an absolute, that's the, I ran out of options, we have to do it this way, but we shouldn't start there.
And let's be clear, for where we had been over the last 6 months in Pulp, these kinds of migrations were not infrequently, they existed. We were making changes at that level. Most of the fixes that happen in Y releases, one, don't require model changes. So they're trivial, right? You upgrade the code, and then you do a rolling restart and everything works. And of the ones that are going to require model changes going forwards, they are going to be additive. We're adding new features, we're adding new plugins, and they are also not a problem. You just upgrade the code, you do the migration, you restart whenever you want to, and the ones that have restarted have new stuff, and the ones that haven't restarted don't. So it's not like this is a 75% of the time when we're fixing problems, we have to be very careful about this. But we do need to start thinking in this way, but this isn't the main path of the kinds of things that happen in applications that are where we are in Pulp 3's lifecycle right now. At least that's my impression.
Yep, I agree. So we're at our time.
Yep. I want to talk about next steps, but I was waiting to see if this came up, but it didn't. So there's this issue that people talk about with zero downtime migrations where there's a table lock. So the way that the issue is that a table lock during the migration causes the migration application, the applying of it, to practically take minutes to hours. This is on extremely large databases. I don't think this is necessarily a problem that we're going to experience, but one of the resources in this link is this project called Django PG0 Downtime Migrations. I don't think we should rush out and use this project, but its purpose in the world is to address this problem. And the problem is that you want to be smarter about applying the migrations to avoid database transactional situations that are unbearably long, which would cause your application code to have an error, even though the change you're making isn't really even affecting your application code. And so what it does is it batches your SQL calls and turns your table locks into row locks, which affect a smaller portion, which reduce the amount of time those locks are applied, which allows the database to chunk through your long ass table in pieces. So just to call it out, that's a thing. There's an answer. There you go.
Yeah, but there's an answer. I mean, if you think about, for example, like the container plugin, where it has repos with hundreds of thousands of files in them, right? We're going to hit big tables, and that may become useful, I think, Brian, faster than we think it's gonna.
No, we're just gonna get the data model right from the beginning, and it'll be
That's
fine.
right. That's right. We're never no changes to data model. Perfect. If you don't like it, it's your fault.
I'm just kidding. Thank you for sharing that, Brian. And thank you all of you for the great discussion. This was awesome. I'm gonna stop recording now.
Hey, Dennis, is there a next steps part of this chat?
Yeah, we have that ticket. and I think we should update it. I think it contains most of this information already, but I think we should into approach. We will add CI to kind of give us more information about what our migrations are doing, and go with it from that. I really do think that the first thing we have to do is add CI that looks for these things.
Yeah.
Do we want to not promote, but kind of share our intentions on the mailing list? Because at some point when we decide to switch to it, I guess we would need to have some kind of, if this plugin supports zero downtime migration or if this does not. So plugin writers will be aware of it, that it's kind of coming, or at least there are plans.
Yeah, I think we want to publicize this partially for that, Tanya, but partially because there's a lot of bright people, as you know, we've had input from this week, who might look at a first, hey, we're working towards zero downtime, and go, oh shit, I did that full time for 6 months, and can I help, kind of thing. So I'd really like to publicize this early, that we're working towards it, not any promises for schedule, but just we recognize that this is a need and we've got ideas, kind of thing. So we can get
the Pulp dev, like not Pulp list, but Pulp dev for plugin writers mostly.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. That sounds great.
Huge +1.
I'm seeing action items at line 44 and 45.
Yep. Send out an email to Pulp Dev. Is that what we're thinking we want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, because users will just be like, yay.
Well, no, users will be like, oh, so I can have it Tuesday, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
And who will be able to send this email?
I can definitely send
Dennis, obviously.
Yep. And I will also work on getting a ticket onto our sprint, not necessarily the next sprint or anything, but that will focus on the CI. Does that sound good? Awesome. All right. Now I'm going to stop the recording. Now that it's all on record. Let's see how I do that. All right.
I noticed that streams on YouTube are kind of recorded. They're saved there. It's like one long meeting.
Yeah, they're saved but unlisted. They don't show in our video channel. So if you didn't have the links, you wouldn't see them.
I saw them today by accident. They were on the right side panel, like reference to that and suggestion to watch from the previous days.
Oh, really? On the YouTube channel?
Yeah, there was current stream like on the top of the screen.
Yeah.
And then on the right side in the column were like suggestions for the videos. There was our streams from other days.
Okay.
But I don't know if there is a way to find it. I don't know.
Yeah, you can see the live streams here. I'll paste the link.
Oh, okay. I was looking in the video sections.
Yeah,
I like it how I'm learning how YouTube works while we're on YouTube.
The third row, you can see all the live streams.
Oh, okay. Cool.
It's very agile. It's a lot like learning to swim while drowning.
Oh, yeah. Look.
Cool. All right. So our next talk is. What is our next talk? Let's see.
In 4 minutes.
Yeah.
It's our miscellaneous talk.
Exactly right.
Miscellaneous topics.
All the topics. I'm going to go grab some tea. I'll be right back, guys. I'll see you in 4.
Yep. All right. See you guys in 4.
Matthias, you're sideways.
Yeah, I wanted to say, should we do like a sideways popcorn, like everyone?
Gonna make people motion sickness.
Imagine like everyone on the call is like this way.
Hey, Matthias, your camera is 90 degrees off.
That's on purpose. So people do exercise with their neck. Someone else should put their 90 degrees on the other side. Yeah, exactly.
I thought it's a tribute.
This is my fix for the problem.
Awesome.
I just figured it was because Matthias was living 90 degrees around the globe from here, so everything is tilted a little bit. That's all. I mean, I've had a bunch of meetings with Red Hatters in Brisbane, and they're all upside down. It's weird.
Yeah, Google Meet auto detects that, auto corrects that 180 degrees, but doesn't auto correct 90 degrees.
Yeah, there we go. That's the problem.
Yeah,
It's a Kiwi problem.
this is why Fabricio comes in perfectly in South America.
Yes.
All right, so are we ready to start on our miscellaneous topics? Are we still waiting for more people to get back?
I also just saw the movie Tenet. I wonder if they're going to add inversion support.
Exactly. Dennis, I would say go ahead and let folk catch up.
Cool. So I think we wanted to continue the lockless pulp discussion. And really, I think what we probably want to focus on is specific goals that we want to achieve. How does that sound as a topic to discuss? Because
I fear it kind of takes all the time away. Maybe we should start with the others.
That's probably not a bad point.
yet?
Yes.
Or no?
Well, I don't think we have a goal to discuss all of them. It was just a list of what we would like to discuss. I doubt we'll be able to cover everything.
Yep, I agree. So do we have any other topics that folks think are more pertinent, more important to discuss at this time?
Yeah, I put the merge pulp lift into installer topic
Yeah.
there because it came up yesterday and I had the impression we didn't agree on something.
Oh,
Also,
that's true. We did say to put this on
if
the
we
list.
merge them, there's at least the question which one is to merge into which.
Oh, I think that Pulp Lift content needs to merge into the Pulp installer repository.
That's the same one, I think.
Yeah, and I would like to spend a little bit of time on this just because we've heard, and I can't remember where, my apologies, from folk in the community that it can be confusing because the docs say different things depending on where you are and what your role is. If we could have one story, it would be easier on our community.
Yes, I agree.
And
So
it sounds
what will
quite
that
natural that you want to install Pulp, you get to the Pulp installer.
Exactly. And Pulp Installer will help guide you through that or something, but there's one place. I would be happier with that. What is that going to take to get what Pulp Lift does now available in Pulp Installer?
Yes, and well, I put the topic up there because if we decide this is the way we can or we want to go, I would volunteer to just. So the next question would be the timeline.
I mean, I'm great with actionable plans that somebody else is going to do. So,
I think we want to do this soon as time allows us. And I don't think this is gonna. I think the biggest change is going to be really the documentation updates, where we reference all these things as separate. So I think the first thing to do is write up a ticket so we can track this effort in Redmine.
Okay. Well, doesn't seem to be too controversial, but that makes it a short topic. We can go to the next.
Cool.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
So will those changes, well, because like if we merge it, will it affect Catalog in some way? Do they use our installer? I'm just trying to understand how much work needs to be done if we're adding
Yeah, so Catalog does
items
not
to
use
our 3-month planning, which potentially are not critical, but definitely very valuable for users.
Yep, Catella does not use our installer, and I don't think there's really going to be any change to the users other than their ability to use the same repository to do Pulp Lift stuff, to
Yes,
create a dev environment.
I think it's mostly additive to the installer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
just how much it will be disruptive for developers?
Yes, everyone using Pulp Lift will probably need to rebuild their boxes from scratch.
That sounds painful.
Once.
Yep. Exactly. Okay.
So 90% of the people affected by this are on this call right now. And I just had to rebuild my box yesterday because I just blew it the hell up because it's a dev box and that's what you do. So.
Yeah.
Plus, Neil, this is 2020. Everything's a pet, no cattle. Sorry, reverse that.
Well, man, I mean, man, okay. You've actually triggered me now with the pet and cattle thing. I hate that terminology so much because Everyone cares about their cat. I've met farmers. Farmers care a lot about their cattle. It is probably the worst analogy you could have ever used for describing containers versus machines.
Yep.
Like, the analogy I tend to go with is ants and ant farms. Like, nobody names an ant. Nobody cares about an individual ant. They care about the whole ant farm. And, like, cattle still get names. Anyone who has ever worked with anyone on a farm knows that cattle still get names.
This is Neil's lightning talk.
I mean,
like this, it's the most. Every single container talk, every single Kubernetes talk, it burns me up because it is so unbelievably wrong, and it's such a bad analogy. Because anyone who does even a modicum of research knows that they're wrong.
I agree with you.
Yep.
So, do we agree that we want to move forward with this change soon?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the Pulp merge.
We're talking about merging Pulplift's functionality into the installer, so there's just one thing instead of two.
That makes sense. That's fine.
No cattle will be named
I never
or
actually
harmed
understood
during
why
this
they were
process.
separate to begin with.
So the other topics. So I think we can move on from this topic. I'd like us to kind of continue the discussion about the lockless pulp discussion that we had earlier in the week, really, I want us to focus on some goals that we want to achieve with improving some of the problems that we have now. And so, Brian, would you be able to kind of reiterate the problems that we have with our current design?
Yeah, I mean, they're on line 8 and line 9. These are the main problems that I feel like we need to address. And the orphan line 9, even though it's later, I'm going to start with that one because that's actually our most serious problem. Orphan cleanup right now is a singleton, and it waits until all other tasks in the entire tasking system have halted before it runs. And then when it runs, it takes a long time. Daniel, as he's done in so many areas of our code, has improved the performance significantly. However, I believe he's reached the conclusion, but let me know if this isn't right, Daniel, that we can't really make it go much faster. And yet it takes, on a good run with a small number of units, 3 to 4 minutes. We've also gotten reports, no joke, of it taking 15 hours. I know. Yes. Thank you. So we absolutely cannot continue down this in this situation. It is untenable. And so how would we mitigate this? And the answer, I think, is the way to speed up orphan cleanup is to not do orphan cleanup. What we could do instead is use either a periodic task that runs in parallel with other tasks. So even though it takes a long time, it doesn't matter because it's just running. It's not blocking any work. That solves the main problem. Or we could use a ref counting implementation where upon the last, as soon as the orphan is created, where the last repository version pinning a particular content units being the orphans here, it no longer references it. It is deleted as part of that process itself. And so that kind of amortizes the big cost over a bunch of other operations, which I think would also be acceptable. Both of these approaches have the same impact and downside on our code. So which one we go with, I don't really even care, as long as we pick one of them, or a third idea. But the downside and impact is the same. It's a change of guarantee that plugin writers enjoy today and they would no longer enjoy. So specifically, your plugin code is guaranteed that because content is never deleted from underneath you, either on the database or the file system, when you check for a content unit, you can know that in a few minutes later, while your task code is still running, it's still going to be there. And that's the guarantee. It's a data consistency property. And this is guaranteed because orphan cleanups wait until no other tasks are running. And that's how we make this guarantee. So if we started, say we ran an orphan cleanup task in the background, same code we'd use today, very easy to do. Let's see how that would play out on the Stages API, for instance. So the Stages API has a stage that looks for content units. It's the content unit query stage. And if Pulp already knows about the content unit, then at a later stage, it associates that content unit with the repository version that's being created. And if we make this change, the Stages API would probably query and say, oh, I know about content unit foobar version 123. And then when the association stage goes to associate it, it would get a SQL error saying, I don't have index in the RPM content unit table with foobar version 123. And so similarly in other parts of our code, but I mean, this is just one example. It's a similar pattern elsewhere. And database transactions can't save us anywhere in this area because this code runs on the order of minutes. And so that's why we can't have a data consistent view. There are other options, like things like what Lagos Pulp says to do. I don't actually know how to implement those things. I'll just leave it at that. But I do know how to implement this. And we could elegantly handle these, oh, my content unit isn't here anymore. But I'll just say, or not. We could just fail. This situation's not going to happen that often. A user can just rerun the task. Everything will be fine. Because on the second run, for example, with the Stages API, when it queries that time, it won't find the content unit. And it will know, oh, I have to download this thing. I have to save this thing. It does all the stuff it does today. And so my thesis here is that it would be very easy to make orphan cleanup a periodic task that runs whenever, once a week, once a day, whatever. Let it run in parallel with all the other tasks. Errors will happen infrequently, and we'll see how bad it is.
I have a question. When you say run a periodic orphan cleanup task, as far as I understood, you don't want to lock on all the repositories because it will end up into the same situation as we're right now.
Correct. It'll run it'll run without any locks, which means that as soon as it's at the head of the resource manager queue, the resource manager will assign it to any worker.
So Brian, and maybe this is for Daniel, those issues. It's not, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not cleaning up the Postgres database metadata. There are hundreds of thousands of actual files on disk that we're deleting one at a time. Is that part of the problem?
Not based on the
so
analysis.
I don't know. Even the, my understanding is that even the issue Catella reported and they had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of content.
Right.
They were deleting the orphans. even on their system, they didn't have all the artifacts downloaded. I think it was all on demand. So that is not including deleting the files. However,